Ashoka's policy of Dhamma. Objectives. This unit deals with Ashoka's policy of Dhamma. After reading this unit, you will be able to understand the historical background of the formulation of the policy of Dhamma, the way Dhamma figures prominently in Ashokan edicts, the essence of Ashoka's policy of Dhamma as explained by him and as manifested in his welfare activities, paternal attitude, etc. The distinction between Ashoka as an individual, a believer in Buddhism, and Ashoka as an emperor initiating a state policy, and the various means employed by Ashoka to propagate his policy of Dhamma, the role of the Dhamma Mahamatras. Introduction. Ashoka Maurya succeeded to the Mauryan throne around 269 BC. Many historians consider him as one of the greatest kings of the ancient world. His policy of Dhamma has been a topic of lively discussion among scholars. The word Dhamma is the Prakrit form of the Sanskrit word Dharma. Dhamma has been variously translated as piety, moral life, righteousness, and so on. But the best way to understand what Ashoka means by Dhamma is to read his edicts. The edicts were written primarily to explain to the people throughout the empire the principles of Dhamma. This is why most of the edicts have something or the other to say about Dhamma, about how keen Ashoka was that his subjects should practice Dhamma, and how keen he was that the affairs of the state too were carried out according to the principles of Dhamma. To make principles of Dhamma accessible and understandable to all, he put up edicts or inscriptions at the important points throughout the empire and sent messengers of the Dhamma outside the empire. It must be clearly understood that Dhamma was not any particular religious faith or practice, so we should not translate Dhamma or its Sanskrit equivalent Dharma as religion. It was also not an arbitrarily formulated royal policy. Dhamma related to norms of social behavior and activities in a very general sense, and in his Dhamma, Ashoka attempted a very careful synthesis of various norms which were current in his time. To understand why and how Ashoka formulated Dhamma and what he meant by it, one has therefore to understand the characteristics of the time in which he lived and to refer to Buddhist, Brahminical, and various other texts where norms of social behavior are explained. Historical background. To understand the various aspects of the policy of Dhamma and the reasons for its formulation, we would necessarily need to sketch the historical background against which it became possible for Ashoka to enunciate it. In the next three subsections, we shall deal with this historical background. Socio-economic background. The Mauryan period witnessed a change in the economic structure of the society with the use of iron, resulting in surplus production. A changeover took place from a simple rural economy to a pattern of economy in which cities and towns also played an important part. It has been generally argued that the use of northern black polished ware is an indicator of material prosperity of the period. The use of punch marked silver coins and some other varieties of coins, the conscious intervention of the state to safeguard trade routes, and the rise of urban centers point to a structural change in the economy requiring necessary adjustments in the society. The commercial classes had also come to the forefront. The emergence of urban culture, by its very logic, demanded a more flexible social organization. The incorporation of tribes and peoples from the outlying areas into the social fabric also presented a problem. The response of the Brahminical social order, based on the fourfold Varna division, was to make the caste system more rigid and deny a higher status to the commercial class. The rigidity of the Brahminical caste sharpened the division within the society. The lower orders turned to the various heterodox sects, and this created social tensions. It was this situation which Emperor Ashoka inherited when he ascended the Mauryan throne. Religious conditions. The Brahminical hold over society, assiduously built through the later Vedic period, was coming under increasing attack. The privileges of the priest, the rigidity of the caste system, and the elaborate rituals were being questioned. The lower orders among the four castes began to favor the new sects. The Vaishyas, who were technically included in the higher category, were treated as inferior to both Brahmins and Kshatriyas. The opposition of the commercial class to Brahmanism was to give a fillip to the other sects of the society. Buddhism began as a schismatic movement from the more orthodox outlook of the Brahmanism. Its basic tenet was an emphasis on misery and advocacy of the middle path. It was a set of ethical principles. Buddhism opposed the dominance of Brahmins and the concept of sacrifices and rituals. It thus appealed to the lower orders and to the emerging social classes. The human approach to relations in society preached by Buddhism further attracted different sections to Buddhism. Polity. You have already read that the Mahajanpads of the 6th century BC marked the beginning of the state system in many parts of India. This means that only small section of society came to have monopoly of power, which they exercised over the rest of the society in various ways and for various purposes. There were monarchies in which the king was the supreme authority, and there were Gana Sanghas in which the rulers were a group of hereditary Kshatriyas or members of a clan. By the time Ashok ascended the throne, the state system over a period of more than 200 years had grown very elaborate and complex. It was characterized by the political supremacy of one region, that is Magध, over the vast territory which comprised many previous kingdoms, Ganasanghas, and areas where no organized states had existed before. Existence within its vast territory of various geographical regions, cultural areas, and of different faiths, beliefs, and practices. Monopoly of force by a ruling class of which the emperor was the supreme head. Appropriation of a very substantial quantity of surplus from agriculture, commerce, and other sources. Existence of an administrative apparatus. The complexity of the state system demanded an imaginative policy from the emperor, which required minimal use of force in such a large empire having diverse forms of economy and religions. It could not have been controlled by an army alone. A more feasible alternative was the propagation of a policy that would work at an ideological level and reach out to all sections of society. The policy of Dhamma was such an endeavor. Distribution of inscriptions. Ashok used the medium of his edicts to expound the policy of Dhamma. Study the map given in the unit 18 of this block. It shows to you the distribution of Ashok's inscription of various kinds, such as major rock edicts, minor rock edicts, pillar edicts, and so on. Ashok engraved his views about Dhamma on these edicts, which were meant to be read by people of various areas. In doing so, Ashok was trying to establish direct communication with his subjects. These inscriptions were written in different years of his rule. An examination of the principles as expressed in them would give us a clear idea of what Ashok meant by Dharma. The inscriptions can be divided into two categories. The smaller group of these inscriptions reveal that the king was a follower of Buddhism and were addressed to the Buddhist church or the Sangha. In this, there is declaration of Ashok's own relationship with the Buddhist order. In one of the inscriptions, he mentions by their title some of the scriptures with which all Buddhists should be familiar with. Inscriptions of the other category are known as the major and minor rock edicts, which were inscribed on rock surfaces. It included also the pillar edicts inscribed on specially erected pillars. All sites of Ashokan inscriptions were chosen carefully to ensure that they were accessible to a large number of people. Thus, as has been pointed out, these edicts may be described as proclamations to the public at large. They explain the idea of Dhamma. We must make a distinction between Ashok's policy of Dhamma, which stressed on social responsibility, and Ashok's own commitment as a Buddhist. There has been a tendency in the past among us historians to study the policy of Dhamma and Ashok as a Buddhist in the same context without making any distinction. A careful examination of the inscriptions would suggest that Ashok, on the one hand, declared his personal association with the Buddhist order, and on the other, he tried to teach through the policy of Dhamma the importance of social responsibility and toleration among us different members of society. We will discuss this in detail in the subsequent sections. Dhamma causes. In examining the causes of the policy of Dhamma, we have already outlined the historical background earlier in this unit. We have suggested that the policy of Dhamma was an earnest attempt at solving some of the problems that a complex society faced. However, the policy was nurtured in the mind of the Ashok, and through society, and through it However, the policy of was nurtured in the mind of Ashok, and through it he attempted to resolve some of the tensions within society. Ashok's private beliefs and his own perceptions of how he should respond to the problems of his empire were responsible for the formulation of the policy of Dhamma. It is necessary for us to understand the immediate social environment in which Ashok grew up as it influenced him in the later years of his life. The modern kings are known to have adopted an eclectical outlook. Chandragupta took recourse to Jainism in his later years and Bindusar favored the Ajivikas. Ashok himself adopted Buddhism in his personal life, though he never imposed Buddhism on his subjects. Before studying the actual contents of Dhamma, let us briefly recapitulate the main points of the overall situation that shaped a policy such as this. By the time Ashok ascended the throne, the modern imperial system had become a complex phenomena. The imperial system encompassed various cultures, beliefs, and social and political patterns. Ashok had to either maintain the structure by force, which would incur tremendous expenses, or to define a set of social norms which would be acceptable to all, cutting across all social practices and religious beliefs. Ashok found his answer in the policy of Dhamma. Ashok was aware of the tensions which the rise of heterodox sects like Buddhism, Jainism, and Ajivikism had generated in society. They were all opposed to the domination of the Brahmins in some way or the other and had a growing number of supporters. But Brahmins continued to have strong hold on society, and some measure of hostility was inevitable. It was essential to bring about a climate of harmony and mutual trust in a situation such as this. There were obviously many areas within the empire where neither Brahminical system nor following of the heterodox sects prevailed. Ashok himself refers to the country of the Yavanas, where neither Brahminical nor Sarmanical culture was in vogue. Besides, there were many tribal areas in the empire where people were obviously not familiar either with Brahminical or heterodox ideas. To make the empire survive and to bring some measure of cohesion within the empire in the midst of such diversity, it was essential that there should be some common pattern of behavior and common approach to the problems of society. Contents of Dhamma. The principles of Dhamma were so formulated as to be acceptable to people belonging to different communities and following any religious sect. Dhamma was not given any formal definition or structure. It emphasized on toleration and general behavior. Dhamma stressed on dual toleration. It emphasized on toleration of people themselves and also on toleration of their various beliefs and ideas. There is a stress on the notion of showing consideration towards slaves and servants. There is stress also on obedience to elders, generosity towards the needy, Brahmins and servants, etc. Ashok also pleaded for tolerance of different religious sects in an attempt to create a sense of harmony. The policy of Dhamma also laid stress on non-violence. Non-violence was to be practiced by giving up war and conquest and also as a restraint on the killing of animals. However, Ashok realized that a certain display of his political might may be necessary to keep the primitive forest tribes in check. The policy of Dhamma also included certain welfare measures like planting of trees, digging of wells, etc. Ashok attacked ceremonies and sacrifices practiced regularly on various occasions as meaningless. A group of officers known as the Dhamma Mahamattas were instituted to implement and publicize the various aspects of Dhamma. Ashok thrust a very happy responsibility on them to carry his message to the various sections of society. However, they seem gradually to have developed into a type of priesthood of Dhamma with great powers and soon began to interfere in politics as well. In order to make all these aspects of Dhamma clearer, we will see how the policy chronologically developed by examining the contents of some of the edicts. Major Rock Edict Number 1 declares prohibition of animal sacrifice and holiday of festive gatherings. Major Rock Edict 2 relates to certain measures of social welfare which are included in the working of Dhamma. It mentions medical treatment for men and animals, construction of roads, wells, tree planting, etc. Major Rock Edict 3 declares that liberality towards Brahmins and Shramans is a virtue, respect to mother and father, etc. are all good qualities. Major Rock Edict 4 is a very important statement of the policy of Dhamma. The edict comments that due to the policy of Dhamma, the lack of morality and disrespect disrespect towards Brahmins and Shramans, violence, unseemly behavior to friends, relatives, and others, and evils of this kind have been checked. The killing of animals to a large extent was also stopped. Major Rock Edict 5 refers to the appointment of Dhamma Mahamattas for the first time in the 12th year of his reign. These special officers were appointed by the king to look after the interest of all sects and religions and spread the message of Dhamma in each nook and corner of the society. The implementation of the policy of Dhamma was entrusted in their hands. Major Rock Edict 6 is an instruction to Dhamma Mahamattas. They are told that they could bring their reports to the king at any time, irrespective of whatever activity he may be engaged in. The second part of the edict deals with speedy administration and transaction of smooth business. Major Rock Edict 7 is a plea for toleration amongst all sections. It appears from the edict that tensions among the sects were expressed intensely, perhaps in open antagonism. The plea is part of the overall strategy to maintain unity. Major Rock Edict 8 states that Dhamma Yatras, that is tours, would be undertaken by the emperor. The earlier practice of the emperor of going out on hunting expeditions was given up. Dhamma Yatras enabled the emperor to come into contact with various sections of people in the empire. Major Rock Edict 9 attacks ceremonies performed after birth, illness, marriage, and before setting out for a journey. A century is passed against ceremonies observed by wives and mothers. Ashok instead lays stress on the practice of Dhamma and uselessness of ceremonies. Major Rock Edict 10 denounces fame and glory and reasserts the merits of following the policy of Dhamma. Major Rock Edict 11 is a further explanation of the policy of Dhamma, emphasis on respect to elders, abstaining from killing animals, and liberality towards friends. Major Rock Edict 12 is again an appeal towards toleration among sects. This edict reflects the anxiety the king felt due to conflict between sects and carries his plea for harmony. Major Rock Edict 13 is of paramount importance in understanding the Ashokan policy of Dhamma. The Rock Edict pleads for conquest by Dhamma instead of war. This is a logical culmination of the thought processes which began from the first Rock Edict. And by conquest, what is perhaps meant is the adaptation of the policy of Dhamma by a country rather than its territorial control. The text of the edict reads, ठीक है, तो 13th Rock Edict का टेक्स्ट का रीड करता है. When we had been consecrated 8 years, the beloved of the gods, the king Piyadasi, conquered Kalinga. 150,000 people were deported, 100,000 were killed, and many times that number perished. Afterwards, now that Kalinga was annexed, the beloved of the gods very earnestly practiced Dhamma, desired Dhamma, and taught Dhamma. On conquering Kalinga, the beloved of the gods felt remorse, for when an independent country is conquered, the slaughter, death, and deportation of the people is extremely grievous to the beloved of the gods and weighs heavily on his mind. What is even more deplorable to the beloved of the gods is that those who dwell there, whether Brahmins, Shramans, or those of other sects or householders, who show obedience to their superiors, obedience to mother and father, obedience to their teachers, and behave well and devotedly towards their friends, acquaintances, colleagues, relatives, slaves, and servants, all suffer violence, murder, and separation from their loved ones. Even those who are fortunate to have escaped and whose love is undiminished by the brutalizing effect of war suffer from the misfortunes of their friends, acquaintances, colleagues, and relatives. This participation of all men in suffering weighs heavily on the mind of the beloved of the gods. Except among the Greeks, there is no land where the religious order of the Brahmins and Shramans are not to be found, and there is no land anywhere where men do not support one sect or the other. Today, if 100th or 1,000th part of those people who were killed or died or were deported when Kalinga was annexed were to suffer similarly, it would weigh heavily on the mind of the beloved of the gods. This inscription of Dhamma has been engraved so that any sons or great grandsons that I may have should not think of gaining new conquests, and in whatever victories they may gain should be satisfied with patience and light punishment. They should only consider conquest by Dhamma to be a true conquest, and delight in Dhamma should be their whole delight, for this is of value in both this world and the next. This is Ashok's testament against war. It graphically depicts the tragedy of war and shows why he turned against it. It is a unique event in the annals of the ancient world because we do not know of any other contemporary monarch who renounced war. Ashok embarked on the policy of Dhamma after this war. Ashok's Dhamma and the Mauryan state. Ashok's Dhamma was not simply a collection of high sounding phrases. He very consciously tried to adopt it as a matter of state policy, for he declared that all men are my children, and whatever exertion I made, I strive only to discharge the debt that I owe to all the living creatures. It was a totally new and inspiring ideal of kingship. In the Arthashastra, the king owed nothing to anyone. His only job was to rule the state efficiently. Ashok renounced war and conquest by violence and forbade the killing of many animals. Ashok himself set the example of vegetarianism by almost stopping the consumption of meat in the royal household. Since he wanted to conquer the world through love and faith, he sent many missions to propagate Dhamma. Such missions were sent to far off places like Egypt, Greece, Sri Lanka, etc. The propagation of Dhamma included many measures of people's welfare. Centers for the medical treatment of men and beasts were founded inside and outside the empire. Shady groves, wells, fruit orchards, and rest houses were laid out. This kind of charity work was a radically different attitude from the king of Arthashastra, who would not incur any expenses unless they brought more revenues in return. Ashok also prohibited useless sacrifices and certain forms of gatherings, which led to waste and indiscipline and superstition, as mentioned earlier. In order to implement these policies, he recruited a new cadre of officials called Dhamma Mahamattas. Part of these groups' duties was to see to it that people of various sects were treated fairly. Moreover, they were especially asked to look after the welfare of prisoners. Many convicts who were kept in fetters after their sentence had expired were to be released. Those sentenced to death were to be given a grace for 3 days. Ashok also started Dhamma Yatras. He and his high officials were to tour the country in order to propagate Dhamma and establish direct contact with the subjects. It was because of such attitudes and policies that modern writers like Kern called him a monk in a king's garb. Dhamma interpretations. The Ashokan policy of Dhamma has been an issue of intense controversy and debate among scholars. Some scholars have suggested that Ashok was a partisan Buddhist and have equated Dhamma with Buddhism. It has also been suggested that it was the original Buddhist thought that was being preached by Ashok as Dhamma, and later on certain theological additions were made to Buddhism. This kind of thinking is based on some Buddhist chronicles. It is believed that the Kalinga War was a dramatic turning point where Ashok, out of remorse for the death and destruction of war, decided to become a Buddhist. The Buddhist records also credit him with the propagation of Buddhism in India and abroad. One cannot, however, lay the charge of being a partisan against Ashok. There are two strong arguments to prove that Ashok, as an emperor, did not favor Buddhism at the expense of other religious faiths. Ashok's creation of the institution of the Dhamma Mahamattas convincingly proves that Ashok's Dhamma did not favor any particular religious doctrine. Had that been the case, then there would have been no need for such an office, as Ashok would have utilized the organization of Sangha to propagate Dhamma. A careful study of the rock edicts depicts that Ashok wanted to promote tolerance and respect for all religious sects, and the study and the duty of the Dhamma Mahamattas included working for the Brahmins and the Shramans. These 2 points made it clear that the policy of Dhamma was not the policy of a heretic, but a system of beliefs created out of different religious faiths. There has been some discussion among historians about the result of the Ashok's propagation of Dhamma. Some historians believe that Ashok's banning of sacrifices and the favor that he showed to the Buddhists led to a Brahminical reaction. This in turn led to the decline of the Mauryan Empire. Others believe that the stopping of the wars and emphasis on non-violence crippled the military might of the empire. This led to the collapse of the empire after the death of the Ashok. It has been shown by Romila Thapar that Ashok's Dhamma, apart from being a superb document of his essential humanness, was also an answer to the socio-political needs of the contemporary situation. That it was not anti-Brahminical is proved by the fact that respect for the Brahmins and Shramans is an integral part of his Dhamma. His emphasis on non-violence did not blind him to the needs of the state. Thus, addressing the forest tribes, he warns them that although he hates to use coercion, he may be required to resort to force if they continue to create trouble. By the time Ashok stopped war, the entire Indian subcontinent was under his control. In deep south, he was on friendly terms with Cholas and Pandyas. Sri Lanka was an admiring ally. Thus, Ashoka's no to war came at a time when his empire had reached its natural boundaries. The plea for tolerance was a wise course of action in an ethnically diverse, religiously varied, and class divided society. Ashok's empire was a conglomerate of diverse groups. There were farmers, pastoral nomads, and hunter gatherers. There were Greeks, Kambojas, and Bhojas, and hundreds of groups having divergent traditions. In this situation, a plea for tolerance was the need of the hour. Ashok tried to transcend the parochial cultural traditions by a broad set of ethical principles. Ashok's Dhamma could not survive him. As such, it was a failure. However, we should remember that he was not establishing a new religion. He was simply trying to impress upon the society the need for ethical and moral principles. Let us sum up. Of course, our sources of information about Ashok's Dhamma are his inscriptions, on the basis of which we can say that Ashok preached non-violence, toleration, and social responsibility. He followed these precepts in his administrative policy. It has to be noted that Dhamma cannot be equated with Buddhism. It was a set of principles gleaned from various religious traditions and was implemented to hold the empire together. Keywords: Anusamyan. Ashok refers Major Rock Edict 3 to Anusamyan, or tours of inspection, which some categories of officials had to undertake once every 5 years for expounding Dhamma and for official work. Commercial classes. Sections of Dhamma Yatras. ठीक है, धम्म यात्रा होगी. एक्लेक्टिक का मतलब क्या होता है? Borrowing freely from diverse ideas and philosophies. Eclectic means borrowing freely from diverse ideas and philosophies.